Alright, let's do this. Number 5. The Krypteia. Every year in Sparta, the state selected its most promising young men, usually around 17 or 18 years old, and sent them on a mission. They were given no food, no shoes, and a single knife. They were sent out at night into the Spartan countryside with one objective: hunt and kill helots. Helots were the enslaved population that outnumbered Spartans by as many as 7-1. They farmed the land, cooked the food, and built everything the Spartans used. And every year, Sparta declared a ritual war on them, just to keep the numbers manageable, and the survivors terrified. The young men selected for the Krypteia were expected to survive entirely on their own. They hid during the day and moved at night. They targeted helots who appeared strong, outspoken, or capable of organizing resistance. The killings were not secret. They were state policy. Every autumn, the Spartan ephors, the elected magistrates, formally declared war on the helots so that any killing committed during the Krypteia would be legally sanctioned. That way, the young men could not be charged with murder. It was war, a war declared against a population that had no weapons, no army, and no ability to fight back. The Krypteia served two purposes. First, it was a training exercise. Sparta needed its soldiers to be comfortable killing without hesitation, in the dark, alone, and against unarmed targets. Second, it was population control. The helots who survived learned a very specific lesson. The strongest among you will be the first to disappear. Don't be strong, don't be loud, don't organize. The most terrifying part is that it worked. For centuries, Sparta maintained control over a population that vastly outnumbered them, and the Krypteia was one of the primary reasons. Teenagers with knives hunting human beings in the dark as a school assignment. Number 4. The Laurion Silver Mines. Athens in the 5th century BC was the birthplace of democracy, philosophy, theater, and some of the most important ideas in human history. It was funded almost entirely by one of the most brutal operations in the ancient world. The silver mines at Laurion, located about 40 miles southeast of Athens, employed an estimated 20,000 slaves at their peak. Employed is a generous word. The tunnels were cut into solid rock, some barely 2 feet high. Workers crawled on their stomachs in near total darkness, breathing dust and smoke from oil lamps, chipping away at rock with iron tools for shifts that could last 10 or more hours. Ventilation was almost non-existent. Temperatures underground were extreme. Cave-ins were frequent and rarely resulted in rescue efforts. The average life expectancy of a slave sent to Laurion was estimated at 2 to 3 years, not 2 to 3 years in the mines, 2 to 3 years total, from the day they arrived. The silver extracted from Laurion funded the Athenian navy, the fleet that defeated the Persians at the Battle of Salamis in 480 BC, widely considered one of the most important military victories in Western history. It funded the construction of the Parthenon. It funded the Golden Age that produced Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Every marble column, every philosophical dialogue, every theatrical performance in Athens was underwritten by men dying in the dark underground. The Athenians knew exactly what was happening at Laurion. It was not hidden. Slave owners leased their slaves to the mining operators for profit. Nicias, one of the wealthiest men in Athens and a prominent general, owned 1,000 slaves that he leased to the mines. 1,000 human beings generating income for one man while they crawled through tunnels and died of silicosis. The mines operated for over 300 years. Historians estimate that hundreds of thousands of slaves died in them over that period. The civilization that invented the concept of human freedom was built on top of an underground death factory that ran for 3 centuries. Number 3. The Pharmakos. When a city in ancient Greece was struck by plague, famine, or military disaster, the citizens had a ritual solution. They selected a person, usually someone from the margins of society, a beggar, a criminal, someone physically unattractive or disabled, and designated them as the Pharmakos, the human scapegoat. The word itself is the root of the English word pharmacy because the Pharmakos was considered medicine for the city. The selected person was fed well for a period of time, sometimes days, sometimes longer. They were given figs, cheese, and barley bread. They were treated almost like a guest. Then, on the appointed day, they were led through the streets of the city while citizens beat them with branches, specifically with fig branches and wild plants called squill. They were struck on the genitals. They were pelted with food and refuse. The entire population participated. In some accounts, particularly from the city of Massalia, which is modern-day Marseille, the Pharmakos was thrown from a cliff or stoned at the boundary of the city. Other accounts describe the Pharmakos being driven out into the wilderness and forbidden from returning. The historical record is divided on whether the ritual consistently ended in death or exile, but the function was the same. The suffering and removal of one person was believed to transfer the city's collective misfortune onto them and carry it away. The ritual was performed in Athens during the festival of Thargelia, which occurred annually in late spring. 2 Pharmakoi were selected, one for the men of the city and one for the women. They were paraded through the streets, beaten, and expelled. This was not a fringe practice. It was an official civic ritual in the most culturally advanced city in the ancient world. The people who gave us the word democracy also gave us the word scapegoat. They meant it literally. Number 2, Spartan women. In every other Greek city-state, women were property. They couldn't own land, couldn't vote, couldn't leave the house without permission, and were expected to be invisible in public life. Sparta was different, and not in a way anyone expected. Spartan women trained in athletics from childhood. They ran, wrestled, threw javelins, and competed in physical contests. They did this in public. They did this in minimal clothing, or none at all. This was not optional. It was mandated by the state. The reasoning, attributed to the legendary lawgiver Lycurgus, was that physically strong women would produce physically strong children. The Spartans were breeding soldiers, and they considered the mother's fitness as important as the father's. Spartan women could own and inherit property. By some estimates, women controlled as much as 40% of all land in Sparta. They managed estates while their husbands lived in military barracks until the age of 30. They spoke freely in public. They were known throughout Greece for being outspoken to the point that other Greeks found it shocking. When an Athenian woman once asked a Spartan queen why Spartan women were the only women in Greece who could rule their men, she reportedly answered, "Because we are the only women who give birth to men." The wedding ritual was where things got truly strange. On her wedding night, the bride's head was shaved completely bald. She was dressed in a man's cloak and sandals and left alone in a dark room. Her new husband, who had been living in an all-male barrack since the age of 7, would sneak in at night, consummate the marriage in the dark, and then leave before dawn to return to his barracks. This continued for years. Some Spartan men reportedly fathered children before ever seeing their wife's face in daylight. The reasoning was practical in the most disturbing way possible. Spartan men had spent their entire lives surrounded exclusively by men. The shaved head and men's clothing were designed to make the transition less jarring. The state was literally engineering the physical appearance of brides to help soldiers who had no experience with women feel more comfortable. Sparta didn't just train its men for war, it restructured every aspect of human intimacy around the needs of the military. Number 1. The Agoge. At the age of 7, every Spartan boy was taken from his family by the state. Not voluntarily, the state owned the children. They were placed into groups and entered a training program called the Agoge that would last until they were 20 years old. 13 years of state-controlled physical and psychological conditioning designed to produce the most effective soldiers in the ancient world. The boys were deliberately underfed, not as punishment, as policy. They received enough food to survive, but never enough to feel full. They were explicitly encouraged to steal food to supplement their diet. Stealing was considered a valuable military skill. But if a boy was caught stealing, he was beaten severely, not for the act of stealing, for the failure of getting caught. The lesson was clear: take what you need, but never get caught. One ancient account describes a boy who stole a live fox and hid it under his cloak. When questioned by an elder, the boy stood perfectly still while the fox tore into his stomach with its teeth and claws. He said nothing. He showed no pain. He died standing up rather than reveal what he had stolen. The Spartans told this story not as a tragedy, but as the ideal. The boys slept outdoors or in barracks on beds they made themselves from reeds pulled from the riverbank. They were given 1 cloak per year, no shoes, no blankets. In winter, they were allowed to add thistle to their reed beds because it generated slight warmth. They were regularly subjected to beatings, not as discipline, but as endurance training. There was an annual contest at the altar of Artemis Orthia where boys were flogged until they collapsed or died. Spectators watched. It was entertainment. The daily staple food of a Spartan soldier was melis zomos, black broth. It was made from pork, cooked in its own blood, seasoned with salt and vinegar. Foreign visitors who tasted it found it revolting. One visitor from Sybaris, a city famous for its luxury, reportedly said after tasting the broth, "Now I understand why Spartans do not fear death." The Spartans considered this a compliment. The Agoge produced soldiers who could march without shoes, fight without armor, survive without food, and kill without hesitation. It also produced a society so militarized that it eventually collapsed under its own rigidity. Sparta never adapted. It never innovated. It just kept feeding 7-year-old boys into the same machine for centuries until there weren't enough Spartans left to feed it. The system that made them the most feared warriors in the ancient world is the same system that guaranteed they would eventually disappear. Those are 5 traditions from the civilization that gave us democracy, philosophy, and the Olympic Games. The same people who debated the meaning of justice spent their evenings watching teenagers get flogged at an altar. The same city that built the Parthenon was funded by slaves dying underground. If you found this video interesting, hit subscribe because we go deep on the stories that history class left out. Drop a comment and tell us which tradition shocked you the most. See you in the next one.